The jungle did not announce danger. It never did. It swallowed sound, bent light, and erased distance. Japanese patrols moving through the thick Pacific forest believed they owned the terrain, trained soldiers, supplied units, rifles polished and standardized. What they did not believe was that somewhere inside this green silence, a man was reshaping the wreckage of the sky into death. Days earlier, the aircraft had screamed before it died. A damaged Allied bomber, torn open by flak and fighters, had limped across the clouds like a wounded animal before collapsing into the jungle canopy. Its engines gouged trenches into earth. Aluminum skin peeled away like paper. Fire burned, then suffocated under rain and leaves. When Japanese units arrived later to inspect the crash, they counted bodies, collected documents, and marked the wreck as neutralized. What they did not count was the man who crawled out afterward, burned, bleeding and very much alive. He had been a gunner, not a commander, not a strategist, a man trained to keep firing while everything else failed. When the plane went down, his world collapsed into noise, heat, and broken metal. But when he woke, he did not think like a survivor. He thought like a mechanic of violence. Around him lay aluminum ribs, hydraulic lines, feed chutes, fragments of ammunition belts twisted into useless shapes. To most men it was scrap. To him it was inventory. He stayed hidden for days. Japanese patrols moved nearby, sometimes so close he could smell tobacco and oil on their uniforms. He learned their rhythm. Morning checks, midday lulls, evening camps. At night, the jungle spoke louder than men ever could. In those hours he worked, quietly, methodically, cutting with scavenged blades, bending metal by hand, testing balance with fingers numbed by infection and fatigue. Aircraft guns were never meant to be portable. They were fed by systems, stabilized by mounts, cooled by airflow at altitude. Stripped of all that, they were useless. At least that's what doctrine said. But doctrine did not account for desperation combined with knowledge. He shortened barrels, reinforced housings, reworked feed mechanisms using springs salvaged from seat assemblies. He created a weapon that should not exist, a crude, unstable, brutal gun born from an aircraft's corpse. The first time he fired it, the recoil nearly shattered his shoulder. The sound was wrong, too heavy for the jungle, too mechanical for something so small. Birds exploded into the air. Leaves shredded themselves. He adjusted. He learned. He waited. Japanese scouts began disappearing. At first, command assumed jungle sickness, then stragglers, then deserters. But the bodies told a different story. Entry wounds that made no sense. Firepower inconsistent with any known Allied infantry weapon. No shell casings found. No fixed position identified. It was as if the jungle itself had learned how to kill with metal. One patrol walked directly into him without ever seeing him. He fired from above, using elevation like a forgotten god of war. The gun bucked and screamed. Men fell before they could raise rifles. 20 seconds, silence, smoke drifting through vines. He was gone before the echoes died. Fear spreads faster than bullets. Japanese officers interrogated villagers. They searched for hidden units, supply drops, radios. They found none. Survivors described impossible things. A single man firing like a machine gun nest, then vanishing. A weapon that sounded like an aircraft had crashed again. Command dismissed it as panic. Until casualties reached numbers, panic could no longer explain. He did not kill out of rage. He killed out of arithmetic. Ammunition was finite. Strength was fading. Infection gnawed at him. Every engagement had to matter. He targeted leaders, point men, radio carriers. He let patrols pass if they were too large. He struck when certainty outweighed risk. This was not madness. It was calculation sharpened by isolation. The Japanese began moving differently. Tighter formations, more scouts, more caution. But caution slowed them. Slowness made them predictable. Predictability made them dead. They never found the gun. They found pieces of aircraft, scattered across the jungle, and could not understand how those fragments had been turned into something that erased squads. Reports sent up the chain of command used words like impossible and unconfirmed. Engineers shook their heads. Officers argued. Meanwhile, the jungle kept it secret. By the time Japanese command realized they were not hunting a unit, but a man, it was already too late to approach him like one. And that man was still building. The weapon was never finished. It was constantly becoming. Every night he adjusted it, tightened something, removed something else, shaved weight, redistributed balance. The gun evolved the same way he did, by shedding anything unnecessary to survival. He slept in fragments, rarely more than minutes at a time, waking to phantom footsteps or imagined clicks of rifle safeties. Hunger dulled his pain but sharpened his focus. The jungle was no longer a place. It was a system. Paths, sound corridors, blind angles, kill zones. He mapped it all in his head. Japanese units responded with numbers. Larger patrols, overlapping routes. Aggressive probing meant to flush out what they still believed must be multiple attackers. But numbers worked against them in this terrain. The jungle compressed formations, tangled spacing, broke lines of sight. Orders traveled slower than bullets, and the bullets did not come from where training said they should. He began using the gun differently. Short bursts only. Not to kill at first, but to wound. Wounded soldiers screamed. Screams brought help. Help arrived careless. Then he fired again. Ammunition was spent sparingly, but fear was not. Fear was unlimited. Fear multiplied itself. Japanese soldiers started firing at shadows, at leaves, at nothing. The jungle drank their ammunition and gave nothing back. Officers shouted discipline, but discipline cannot fix uncertainty. Men who do not know where death comes from begin to imagine it everywhere. One afternoon, a patrol stopped near a creek. Helmets off, rifles leaned against trees, water cupped in hands. It was the most human moment they had allowed themselves in days. He waited until they relaxed into it, until posture replaced readiness. Then he fired once. One man fell into the water without a sound. The others froze, unsure if it was an accident, a snake, a slip. That hesitation was fatal. The second burst cut through the group like a saw. Leaves rained down. Water turned dark. The gun jammed at the end, not from failure, but from heat. He did not stay to fix it. He never did. Every engagement left him weaker. Fever came in waves. Sometimes he forgot where he was. Sometimes he dreamed of the aircraft midair, whole again, engines humming. When he woke, he touched the gun to remind himself he was still alive. That it was real. That he was real. Japanese command finally adapted, not tactically, but psychologically. They stopped chasing. They stopped searching aggressively. Instead, they began sealing the jungle. Section by section, fire, controlled burns. Smoke pushed into the green like a suffocating tide. The jungle that had protected him now threatened to expose him. He moved deeper, slower, each step measured, each breath rationed. The gun grew heavier with every mile. He considered abandoning it. The thought lasted seconds. Without it, he was already dead. One night he heard voices speaking softly in Japanese. Too calm, too confident, a trap. They were baiting him with sound, hoping instinct would override caution. He did not fire. He waited. Hours passed. The voices faded. At dawn he found the trap itself. Trip lines, interlocking fields of fire, men positioned to close in. They had finally learned. Just not enough. He circled wide. Came in from behind. Fired into the command element first. Chaos followed. Orders contradicted each other. Men ran into friendly fire. Smoke swallowed everything. When it ended, bodies lay where certainty had been. The number 20 was never intentional. It was counted later. Bodies found across days, across zones, across reports. Officers added them up in disbelief. 20 killed by a man they could not see, using a weapon that should not function. They never understood the most dangerous part of him was not the gun. It was patience by now. The jungle itself seemed to hold its breath. Japanese movements had slowed to a crawl, not because of strategy, but because confidence had been stripped away piece by piece. Soldiers no longer trusted silence. Silence had become the warning. When nothing happened, that was when hands tightened on rifle stocks and eyes searched upward, inward, everywhere at once. The man they hunted had changed. The rules so completely that even standing still felt like a mistake. He was no longer simply hiding. He was shaping their behavior. Patrol routes bent around places where nothing had happened yet, simply because they felt wrong. Camps were set farther apart. Fires burned lower. Voices dropped to whispers that carried farther than shouting ever could. He watched all of it from positions chosen days in advance. His body pressed into roots and mud until insects treated him like part of the terrain. The gun suffered as much as he did. Metal fatigued. Springs weakened. The feed system demanded constant attention. Sometimes he spent entire nights repairing instead of resting, fingers working by memory when vision blurred. The weapon rattled softly now when moved, a sound that terrified him more than enemy fire. He wrapped parts in cloth torn from his uniform, packed joints with jungle resin to deaden vibration. Improvisation was no longer creativity, it was necessity. Japanese command escalated again, this time not with men, but with distance. Mortars, indirect, fire lobbed into suspected zones based on nothing more than patterns of fear and rumor. Explosions tore open areas he had passed through days earlier. Trees shattered. Earth turned inside out. The jungle screamed. He watched from far away, unmoving, letting them destroy ghosts. Food was becoming the real enemy. Hunger hollowed him out, slowed reaction, shortened patience. He trapped what he could, ate what he should not. His stomach rebelled, but he forced it down anyway. Survival was not about comfort. It was about continuation. One more night, one more repair, one more mistake by the enemy. That mistake came sooner than expected. A Japanese reconnaissance element moved ahead of the main force with unusual care. Too much care. Spacing perfect. Movement textbook. They were baiting him again, but this time, they were ready to die to prove he existed. He recognized it immediately, and he used it. He let them pass. For hours, nothing happened. The recon unit reported no contact. Confidence returned just enough to be dangerous. The main body advanced, tighter than before, but heavier, slower, louder. That was when he struck, not at the front, but at the rear. The gun roared once, twice. Men dropped without ever knowing why they had been chosen. The column twisted in confusion, firing in every direction except the correct one. The jungle amplified everything. Echoes bent sound so badly that even experienced officers could not locate the source. Orders overlapped. Men collided. Someone screamed about an ambush unit that did not exist. In the chaos, he vanished again, leaving behind nothing but certainty that the situation was out of control. Later Japanese reports described the engagement as contact. With an unknown automatic weapon, engineers argued again. Infantry officers demanded proof. Proof arrived in body counts and empty stretches of jungle no one wanted to enter anymore. He felt it then, the shift. The enemy was no longer hunting him to kill him. They were hunting him to end the idea of him. The myth had grown too large. It was infecting morale. Men talked about him in low voices, as if speaking louder might summon him. Some believed there were multiple guns. Others believed he was already dead and the jungle was cursed. Fever returned harder this time. He shook uncontrollably, teeth chattering so violently he feared the sound would betray him. He bound his jaw with cloth, pressed his face into mud to cool his skin. The gun lay beside him, unfinished again, always unfinished. He knew this could not last forever, but he also knew the Japanese did not know when it would end, and that uncertainty was still killing them. The Japanese changed tactics again, not because the previous ones had failed, but because fear had begun to rot discipline from the inside. Orders now came with urgency instead of clarity. Units were told to move faster, cover more ground, and accept losses if necessary. That last instruction spread quietly, but its meaning was understood by everyone who heard it. The jungle was no longer a place to be controlled. It was a place to be endured. He noticed the change immediately. Patrols no longer hesitated at ambiguous terrain. They pushed through. They fired less at shadows and more with intent. That made them deadlier, but also sloppier. Speed replaced caution, and speed created gaps. His body was failing him. Infection crawled up his arm from an old burn. The skin was hot, swollen, angry. Every time he raised the gun, pain flared white behind his eyes. He adjusted his firing positions to minimize movement, choosing angles that required less strength and more patience. The jungle gave him that. It always had. One afternoon, he watched a Japanese officer strike a soldier who had frozen mid-step. The sound of the slap carried farther than a rifle shot ever could. The man flinched, ashamed, terrified, human. The officer barked orders, restored motion, restored the illusion of control. That was when he fired. The officer fell backward, surprise locked on his face. The column stopped dead. No one knew who was in charge anymore. That single moment cost them more than bullets ever could. Command units began traveling farther from the front, surrounded by layers of men. Radios crackled constantly now, filling the jungle with information that only made sense to those who believed the situation was manageable. He listened from afar, learning call signs, response times, habits. He did not understand the language fully, but fear translates itself clearly. The gun jammed again during a short engagement. This time it took longer to clear. His hands shook. Sweat blurred his vision. For a moment, just one, he considered leaving the weapon behind and disappearing into the jungle as something less dangerous but more alive. The thought died as soon as it formed. Without the gun, the myth would collapse. And when myths collapse, men become brave again. Japanese forces began sealing escape routes toward the coast. They assumed he would eventually try to reach friendly lines. That assumption was wrong. He was not moving toward anything. He was staying inside them, forcing them to carry him everywhere they went like a weight in the mind. Night operations increased. Flares burned holes in the darkness. Searchlights cut through. Leaves. The jungle resisted, bending light into useless shapes. He moved only when rain fell, letting water erase his tracks and muffle his mistakes. The gun, wrapped in cloth, grew heavier with moisture, but he refused to set it down. Another patrol died without ever seeing him. Fewer men this time. More distance. He was conserving strength now, not escalating. Each action was smaller, quieter, but more deliberate. Japanese reports began describing the enemy as persistent rather than aggressive. That word mattered. Persistent enemies do not burn out. They endure. He felt the end approaching long before the Japanese did. Not the end of fighting, but the end of movement. There were moments when standing up took all the strength he had. When the gun felt like an anchor pulling him into the mud. When the jungle blurred into a single endless green. Still he kept working. Still the gun kept firing. And still, the Japanese could not believe that one man, armed with broken pieces of an aircraft, was holding entire units hostage inside their own fear. The jungle no longer felt endless. It felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were slowly closing in. Japanese forces had reduced their movements to controlled corridors, narrowing the space where uncertainty could live. Fires burned longer now, not to clear land, but to deny darkness. Smoke hung low, clinging to leaves and lungs alike. Breathing hurt. Thinking took effort. The man felt both acutely. He had begun to lose track of time. Days blended together, measured only by hunger and the sound of distant boots. The gun rested across his chest like a second spine, something he could not separate himself from even in sleep. When he dreamed, it fired. When he woke, his hands were already on it. A Japanese unit moved through a ravine he had once used as a sanctuary. They did not stop. They did not spread out. They moved with purpose, weapons ready, eyes forward. This was no patrol. This was a sweep. He watched them pass without firing, the restraint burning hotter than hunger. Killing them would gain nothing. Staying alive would. Later that night, he heard engineers at work. Metal clinked. Tools struck stone. Defensive positions were being built inside the jungle itself. This was new. The Japanese were no longer reacting. They were preparing to stay. That realization settled heavily. A stationary enemy could wait him out. Time, which had been his ally, was beginning to betray him. He tested the gun again quietly. The action felt rough. The spring lagged. One more major jam and he knew it might not recover. He stripped it down piece by piece, laying aircraft metal on jungle soil like ritual offerings. His fingers worked slower now. Infection had stiffened them. He finished the reassembly at dawn, unsure if he had improved it or simply delayed its failure. The next engagement was unplanned. A lone Japanese soldier stepped into a clearing ahead of him, no more than 20 meters away. The man froze. Their eyes met. For a moment, there was no war, just recognition. Two men who understood exactly what the other represented. The soldier's rifle was half raised. Fear won. He turned to run. The gun fired once. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Too open, too exposed. He knew immediately what he had done. Within minutes, shouts cut through the jungle. Boots crashed through undergrowth. Orders came fast and sharp. He moved, forcing his body to obey through pain and dizziness. But the rhythm was wrong. Too many voices, too close. This time they were not guessing. Bullets tore through leaves above him. Bark exploded at shoulder height. He returned fire once, twice. Short bursts meant to slow, not stop. The gun screamed in protest. Heat warped the barrel. He felt it failing even as it killed. He fell hard while moving downhill, the impact knocking air from his lungs. The gun skidded from his grip and struck a tree. For a terrifying second, it did not fire when he pulled the trigger. He cleared the jam with shaking hands, fingers slick with blood and sweat, then rolled and fired blindly into advancing shapes. Japanese soldiers dropped. Others took their place. They were willing to lose men now. Smoke grenades filled the space. Vision collapsed. Sound became everything. He moved by instinct, by memory of terrain. by the weight of the gun dragging him forward. A bullet tore through his leg. He did not scream. Pain had become background noise long ago. When he reached the next ridge, he knew he could not go farther. He set up the gun one last time, propping it against a fallen log, angling it toward the slope he had just climbed. If this was where it ended, it would end loudly. He waited, breath shallow, vision tunneling. Japanese voices grew closer. They still did not understand how he had done it, but they were about to understand what it cost. The waiting was worse than the pain. Pain had edges, limits. Waiting did not. It stretched, distorted, filled every space between breaths. His leg throbbed where the bullet had torn through muscle. Warm and wet, but he barely noticed anymore. What remained of his strength was pooled behind his eyes, focused. Forward, locked onto the slope where the jungle trembled with approaching men. The gun rested against the log like an exhausted animal. Its metal was scorched, warped, stained with oil and blood. Aircraft aluminum, once meant to fly above the world, now pressed into mud, repurposed into something cruel and final. He ran his hand along it once, not in gratitude but in acknowledgement. It had done everything it could, more than it ever should have. Japanese soldiers emerged cautiously, spread wider than before, rifles steady, fear disciplined but not erased. They had learned enough to survive. Longer but not enough to understand what they were facing. They still searched for a position, a nest, a unit. They did not understand that the man himself was the weapon, and the gun was only an extension of will. He fired. The first burst dropped the front line before commands could form. The second burst cut deeper, breaking momentum, scattering confidence. Men dove for cover that did not exist. Orders shouted, then overlapped, then dissolved into noise. The jungle answered with echoes that made the gun sound larger, heavier, endless. The gun jammed. This time it did not clear. He struck it once, twice, furious, desperate. Nothing. The spring had finally died. The metal had finally given up. The aircraft had fallen for the second time. Japanese soldiers realized the change instantly. Fire intensified. Bullets tore into the log, into earth, into him. He felt impacts like distant blows, not pain, just force. He slumped forward, vision dimming, breath shallow and wet. When they reached him, rifles trained, they stopped. There was no unit, no emplacement, no supply line, just a man, a single broken man, a ruined gun built from the skeleton of a dead aircraft. No insignia, no backup, no escape route. Around them lay bodies, too many for one man to have made sense. Officers stared at the weapon, lifting it carefully, confused by its crude construction. Engineers later would shake their heads. It should not have worked. It should not have existed. But it had. Reports would later say 20 had been killed. The number would circulate, grow, harden into legend. Some would argue it was exaggerated. Others would insist it was incomplete. What no report would capture was the time he bought, the fear he planted, the way entire units slowed because one man refused to stop fighting after. The sky itself had fallen on him. The jungle closed in again. Rain washed blood into the soil. Leaves covered metal. The war moved on, indifferent, enormous. But somewhere inside Japanese command, a quiet understanding settled. Technology meant nothing without resolve, and resolve could turn wreckage into a weapon. He was never celebrated, never rescued, never named. But long after the aircraft parts rusted away, long after the jungle erased every trace of him, one truth remained. They did not believe a man could build a gun from an aircraft, until he used it to kill them. And by the time they understood how, it was already over. He was never rescued, never promoted, never even officially recorded. But for days an entire army slowed, hesitated, feared, not because of numbers, not because of technology, but because one man refused to die quietly, using nothing but the broken bones of an aircraft. He proved something war hates to admit. When survival meets skill, even wreckage can become a weapon. And sometimes, the deadliest force on the battlefield is a man with nothing left to lose.